Grace and peace, beloved of God. Thanking you for joining us for the Voice for Justice program. Today is July 31st, and we are so honored and excited to have with us our very own attorneys general here in North Carolina, Josh Stein. And it is an absolute pleasure to have you with us today to kind of share with us what's going on in the state from a legal and from your perspective, and to get some good information out there to our constituents. So I just want to give way and just have you further introduce yourself and tell the folks a little bit about who you are and what makes you tick.
Reverend, thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity of being with you and being with constituents of General Baptist State Convention. It's an honor to be with you. Well, I'm your Attorney General, and what does that mean? My job is I'm the top lawyer in the state. I represent the state, but I also represent the people. And it's about making sure that I use the powers of my office to protect the people of North Carolina. And we do this in so many different ways. We try to keep people safe, communities safe, making sure that we maximize the public safety. And I'm sure we're going to talk more about that today. But we also try to protect consumers, seniors who get scammed. We protect taxpayers from people who are trying to defraud Medicaid or defraud their taxes, which makes you and me pay more than our fair share. We try to protect our natural resources, the air that we breathe and water we drink, to make sure that everybody can live a healthy and happy life. I protect folks' fundamental rights, like the right to vote, which is the most fundamental and foundational in our democracy. And so it's really an honor to be able to serve as Attorney General, because my ability to work on issues that impact people's lives is really very broad, and it's challenging work, but exceptionally rewarding work. And so I love doing it. I come to the position having previously worked in the Attorney General's office. I headed the Consumer Protection Division. I was a senior deputy AG for 8 years under Governor Cooper when he was Attorney General. Yeah. I did that from 01 to 08. And then I got elected to the state Senate, where I served for 4 terms representing the western part of Wake County. So Raleigh, Cary, Morrisville, sort of from the airport to downtown Raleigh. Mm-hmm. And that was exceptionally rewarding work. And then I ran for Attorney General in 2016. I won by a hair's breadth, all of a half of a percentage point, 24,000 votes out of 5 million. Before I was in the AG's office out of law school, I worked for a couple of economic development groups here in North Carolina. One, the Self-Help Credit Union. We were developing affordable housing, predominantly in Durham, in the Walltown neighborhood. Dozens and dozens of rundown rental houses. A lot of them were abandoned, all kinds of social ills, drug use, prostitution. And we bought those houses and one by one fixed them up and sold them as affordable single-family home ownership. And I think they've done well over 100 in the neighborhood. I did the first handful, 6 or 7. I also worked in Wilson on a nonprofit incubator building, an old hospital there called the Mercy Hospital, which was the African-American hospital for many years until in the 60s, the white and black hospitals merged. That building got abandoned and really fell into disrepair, and we fixed that up, and it's quite beautiful in Wilson. And worked for the North Carolina Minority Credit Union Support Center, supporting minority financial institutions owned by the membership throughout Eastern North Carolina predominantly, but also in Charlotte and 1 or 2 in the West. And that was about trying to raise capital to invest in minority businesses across North Carolina. And so at the end of the day, I've had a lot of different jobs, but I've always looked at it as one career. And it's about serving the public. It's about service. And that's what's motivated me to be Attorney General. It's what's motivating me to run for re-election as Attorney General. It's just an incredible honor and incredibly fulfilling to me to be able to do this work.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you for giving us a little further insight on you and about you. Really does my heart good to hear that you are servant first. And that was certainly one of the principles that the Lord Jesus left to the church. He told us that, he that's greatest among you, let him be your servant. And so thank you for being an example, a shining example of a servant leader. Even though you're may be at what some may call the top of the echelon, you are certainly service-based. And so very, very glad to hear that. So you've served in a lot of capacities, as you just shared with us. You wear a lot of hats, and you have your hands in a lot of different things. Right now, we're kind of facing this crisis with COVID-19, and we're,
Yes.
Facing it collectively as a people. I understand we may not all see it the exact same way or feel the exact same way about it, but we're all facing this together. What's some of the things that you've seen come across your desk related to COVID-19 that you would want to share with those who are watching on today, whether it's from a legal perspective or whether it's from a congregative view of the state? Just your perspective with COVID-19 and maybe some of the things that we're doing well as a state.
Okay, thank you. Look, the whole world's been turned upside down. I mean, everything is upside down. If any of us were transported to this moment from last January, I don't know that we can make sense of it, because everything's upside down. And it's because of this terrible global health pandemic that has taken so many lives, nearly 150,000 lives across the country. I don't know if you heard, but we lost Herman Cain, the gentleman who ran for president today.
I didn't know that. It happened today.
They think he may have gotten it at President Trump's rally in Oklahoma, where Herman Cain went without a mask. And so just tragic. I mean, but that's tragic for that family and everybody who was touched by Herman Cain. Now take that by 149,999 other individuals whose lives have been ended before they should have because of this. And things happen, right? Like this pandemic happened, and we knew when it happens, some people will die. Mm-hmm. But I am 100% certain that we did not have to have this extent of suffering that is experienced in this country. We did not have to lose this many lives. We have not needed to have the degree of economic fallout that we've had as a result of the pandemic, had we had leadership in Washington that took this seriously and took the proper steps for us as a nation to handle it. How do I know this? Because we're 4% of the world's population, and we're 24% of the deaths. We have taken more than 5 times what we should have. Mm-hmm. Every other industrialized country is on the end of this. And we're still having more cases than we've ever had. So it breaks my heart to know that leadership matters and that we've had a failure by those in the White House. And when you contrast the president with how our governor here in North Carolina, Roy Cooper, has handled it, it's night and day. Mm-hmm. We have somebody here in North Carolina who is basing his decisions on evidence and science. He is steady. He's compassionate. He is intelligent. He is trying to do what is right for the state. And so I'm just so grateful to us that we've had him. As a result, look, we're still having problems in North Carolina. We still have more cases today than we did 2 weeks ago. So things are not where we want it to be, but when you look at Florida and Georgia and Texas and Arizona, these states where the governor's just opened it wide open, they're really paying a price in terms of the economy and loss of life that we haven't had here. And so thank goodness for that. Bringing it to my work at the Department of Justice, it has obviously affected what we do. My office advises the governor. We're the state's lawyer, so we're his lawyer. So when he comes up with his policy decisions, we help put those in the form of the executive order. And then we go to court to defend those orders from dozens plus lawsuits that have been filed by people who they don't like masks, or they think that bars should be open, or we have one lawsuit saying strip clubs needed to be opened. So we've gone to court to have to defend those laws, and we've had incredible success doing so. Mm-hmm. But we've also seen, I mentioned earlier that a lot of what we do in the AG's office and what I did for 8 years under Cooper was consumer protection. We've seen a lot of instances where we need to stand in for consumers. We've seen price gouging. I've gone to court and gotten orders against folks on that. We've seen scams, all kinds of scams. The scammers, they thrive. They exploit any moment of mass confusion, fear, hysteria, all of which we've seen around COVID. So scams around miracle cures, around masks, around air duct cleaning, around economic impact payments, PPP. They're trying to get their hands on people's money and personal information. So we're doing all kinds of consumer education. And then we're trying to do everything we can to help people who are struggling financially, because we know, 1.2 million North Carolinians have filed for unemployment in just the last 3.5 months. I mean, unbelievable numbers. And so we're trying to do what we can to help those people. For instance, I negotiated something called the Carolina Relief Plan with Bank of America and with State Employees Credit Union, where they were going to work with their customers and experiencing financial difficulties, give them some time to work out their loans, give them a repayment plan and an assurance that they wouldn't foreclose on the home or repossess a car. So I'm trying to do that kind of work. I can't solve everyone's financial problems, but we're trying to find out ways to help people through these challenging times.
Certainly. Wow. Really appreciate the way you kind of contextualize this moment as it relates to COVID-19 and the way it's impacting us across the spectrum of life. It's a health issue, it's an economic issue, but at its center, it's a people issue, regardless of what your economics are. Even someone with the popularity and the wealth of Herman Cain, he is just like the person who transitioned, who may have been homeless and no one knew their name other than their immediate family. So thank you for contextualizing that and really kind of bringing to bear just how serious this is, and also the work that you're doing to kind of help all of us. And I think a good segue, I know many of our viewers want to hear more legal stuff that's happening in the state, but I think a good bridge off of where we are now is to talk a little bit about ACA and what's happening with the Affordable Care Act, and kind of where do things stand. And I know you don't have the crystal ball, but could you kind of share with us where you think things may go, or some desires that the governor has discussed with you, if you can say that, of ways we'd like to see things grow and evolve more with the Affordable Care Act?
Well, the Affordable Care Act was such a critical piece of legislation. It made a difference in the lives of more than 1 million, actually millions of North Carolinians. And we're one of the few states that has not expanded Medicaid. So we still have a chunk of population, people who are working, mind you, they're working. So they don't qualify for Medicaid, but they don't get paid very much. So they don't qualify enough for the subsidies to make health insurance affordable. So these are truly the people we want to help. And the Republicans in the General Assembly refuse and have refused to put out that open hand. I genuinely believe every American should have health insurance. We are the only industrialized nation in the world where that is not the case. And we are the industrialized nation in the world that spends more money per capita than any other country on healthcare. So we're spending twice as much per capita as all these other countries, at least, sometimes more than that. And yet we do worst by our people. It's a travesty. So the Affordable Care Act was such a big development. It helped about 500,000 North Carolinians get health insurance through the health exchanges who otherwise couldn't get it. There are about 400,000 people who are buying private insurance and they're getting federal subsidies to make it affordable who otherwise could not afford it. There's about 70,000 young people who are under the age of 26 who can be on their parents' health insurance until 26 because of the Affordable Care Act. There's 1.8 million seniors who have lower costed prescription drugs because of the Affordable Care Act. We have 4 million North Carolinians, that is 40% of the entire state, who have some kind of pre-existing condition that, but for the Affordable Care Act, they could be discriminated against by insurance companies in the form of either substantially higher premiums or rejection altogether. And there's no health insurance option for those people. And in the era of COVID, where so many people are getting sick with COVID, and we have no idea what the long-term health implications of this are for people's respiratory system and other organs, then we have to have that kind of protection in place. So I say all of this because there are a group of Republican attorneys general, my opposition and my campaign, who are trying to eliminate the Affordable Care Act in its entirety. That case is at the U.S. Supreme Court right now. Trump administration is supposed to defend federal law. Mm-hmm. Early in the case, they switched sides to those trying to eliminate the Affordable Care Act. Wow. So thank goodness that I and about 19, 20 of my colleague attorneys general intervened on the side of defending the law. So I just filed a brief yesterday in the U.S. Supreme Court arguing why what these Republican AGs and the Trump administration are asking for is wrong, not only as a matter of policy. You and I both know it would be devastating to the healthcare system if they win, but they are wrong on the law. They're absolutely wrong on the law. And so I'm hopeful that we will win. What is necessary is to have people in power, whether it's at the state level to say yes to Medicaid expansion, or at the federal level to ensure we have universal coverage. Because even with Medicaid expansion, we're still going to have hundreds of thousands of North Carolinians who don't have health insurance. Mm-hmm. And that's just crazy. It's just wrong. And I am committed to doing everything I can to make sure we have people in power who care about people and ensuring that there's universal health care coverage.
Yeah. Well, one of the areas that I struggle with, and I'm sure probably some of the people watching this program struggle with, is the balance between our politics and our humanity. And I know economics are a reality that all of us face. And I know one of the arguments is the cost of ACA. But we also know conversely that there's a cost when you don't take care of people and they just show up at the hospital and they can't pay that bill. So it still impacts all of us, whether we're proactive or reactive, I guess is the conversation.
I really appreciate your asking that question, Reverend, because if we lose the Affordable Care Act, so there's about 10% of North Carolina that has their health insurance because of the Affordable Care Act. That means the vast majority of us will still have our health insurance. I'm a state employee. I'll still have my health insurance. Mm-hmm. You probably get it through your employment. You'll probably have your health insurance. Here's the thing. All of our health insurance will go up because our insurance companies are now having to compensate all these hospitals that are having all these people walk through the door who cannot pay their bills. Mm-hmm. So the hospitals are standing to lose billions of dollars over a period of time. And the healthcare system, doctors are going to lose money. Health insurance companies are going to have higher premiums. You and I are going to be stuck with a much bigger bill. So I really appreciate your sort of holistic analysis that this is all intertwined. Yeah. And the best way for us possibly to get a handle on the high cost of healthcare, the too high cost of healthcare in the United States, is first to make sure everybody has a means of paying for it.
Yeah.
Because if you do that, then you can rationalize the system. But as long as you have people showing up in the ED who don't have any money and they get a $50,000 bill, that hospital has to get that money from somewhere.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. I hope we will catch up at some point with our humanity and our politics, because when we get to the end of the day, people are people. And none of us get where we are by ourselves, but we won't try to fix the world's ills right now in that regard, but we'll continue at least putting some good information out there. So recently, Governor Cooper put together a task force for racial equity and criminal justice, yes, and named you as one of the co-leaders, if my information was correct, of that project. And so wanted to see now if we could kind of swing in a different direction and just kind of tell us a little bit about this task force for racial equity and just kind of share with us maybe some of the goals and the objectives of the task force.
I appreciate the question. Yes, there is a task force for racial equity and criminal justice. And of course, this is an outgrowth over the horrifying killing of Mr. George Floyd up in Minneapolis. And, Black people don't need to be told that there is inequities in the criminal justice system, right, that they're not treated the same as white people. But what's clear is the rest of America needed an education. Mm-hmm. And one thing about that video is I think it really served to essentially be a smack in the face to this country. Just a bucket of cold water poured on everybody's head and to be like, look at what's happening. Look at what's happening. And so the governor and I've been working on criminal justice reform issues since I've been AG, since I was in the state Senate, things like prisoner reentry and trying to help people be successful when they leave incarceration. Mm-hmm. Things like pretrial release and bond reform, so that we're not locking up people because they're poor, only that they pose a risk to the public. That's why we should be detaining people, because they hadn't even been convicted of the crime for which they were arrested yet. Right. Juvenile justice reform, raising the age so that North Carolina wasn't the only state in the nation to treat 16 and 17-year-olds as adults from a criminal justice perspective. Eliminating the backlog of untested sexual assault kits. North Carolina has more than any other state in the nation. Wow. And what we were saying to victims, predominantly women, is that you gave us the evidence and we're not going to do anything with it. That's not the message. That's not what the criminal justice system should be about. So I've been working on a lot of these issues, but not everything. And what this moment has told us, what the Black Lives Matter movement has demonstrated, is that there is a popular will to demand change. Yeah. And so what Governor Cooper asked me and Associate Justice Anita Earls to do is to co-lead this effort, identify ways to make our criminal justice system fair for everybody. And not only, he said, I'm not really interested, I don't want a commission with a blue ribbon report that goes on a bookshelf. I want an action-oriented task force that accomplishes things, that brings about change. So we're not only supposed to identify the appropriate reforms for the criminal justice system in North Carolina, we are to work for their implementation. And that's our charge. It's a very broad-based task force. We have all perspectives represented. We have criminal justice reform advocates. We've got community advocates. We've got injustice-involved individuals. We've got public defenders. We've got mayors, county commissioners. We've got advocates for people who are victims of crime. We've got advocates for people who are disabled. We've got police chiefs. We've got sheriffs. We've got district attorneys. We have, basically you can see we just have a very broad, fully representative group of people who each of whom have a critical perspective on this issue. Mm-hmm. And what we want to do is come up with the right solution and make sure that those solutions work, because you can come up with some idea that sounds compelling and is compelling, mm-hmm. but it's got to be functional for the system. And so that's what we're looking for: systemic changes to make our system fair.
Sure. Can you share maybe a few things that you guys have initially began to look at or talk about?
Sure. We just got started. We've had two functional meetings and one public forum. And even at the second meeting we had, there was a demonstration of how we want to get to work. We are tasked with coming up with a report by December. Mm-hmm. But we were not limited to holding our recommendations to that. So we considered three reforms. One was a ban on law enforcement engaging in chokeholds, like the one that killed Mr. Floyd. Two is a duty for law enforcement to intervene when they see another law enforcement officer acting outside the scope of their authority, and to report that to their supervisor, like we saw with the three officers who did not do anything. And we had every single person on the task force agree that this was a good idea. And so we made those two recommendations to every law enforcement agency in the state. And I think that come December, we'll probably urge the legislature to pass a law requiring it, because I think we're going to get broad compliance of adoption of that by law enforcement agencies, but not universal. And so we want to make sure that it is universal. And then the third was asking the Supreme Court, which is considering a rule at the moment, to direct the trial courts to take into account someone's ability to pay before levying a fine or demanding fees. Because what we don't want is for people to be in prison because they're poor.
Yeah.
If they're in prison, it's because they did something wrong that necessitates that. But if it's just because they're poor because they can't afford something, no, that's not acceptable. And so we got consensus on that as well. So we've already made 3 recommendations. Look, that's not it. These are important steps, but they're first steps, and we know we have a lot more work to do. And so we have created all these work groups. Oh, so on Tuesday morning, we had a public forum where any citizen in North Carolina could contact us. And we had some 55, 60 people who each shared their perspective on the criminal justice system and what changes they wanted to see. It was very informative. And now we're breaking into 4 work groups so we can tackle the work. And basically, we want to be very holistic about the way we look at criminal justice because, I mean, it starts from a person walking down the street and encountering law enforcement, that first interaction. And then what does that law enforcement officer do at that moment? How does he or she exercise their discretion? Do they issue a citation, like a ticket, or do they arrest the person? Because that decision right there is going to have fundamental outcomes depending on what they do. Then, assuming it is an arrest and they go to court, what does the magistrate do in terms of setting a bond? Do they set a bond just because there's some chart that tells them to, or do they do an independent assessment that this person poses a risk to the community and should be detained? Because otherwise, the law in North Carolina is very clear. There should be no financial conditions on someone's pretrial release unless they're a risk to other people, a witness, or to flee. And so that needs to happen. Then there's the trial, there's the sentencing, there's time while they're incarcerated, and then when they get out. Like at every stage, we want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to root out the bias that exists in the system today.
Sure. I know sometimes when we have conversations like this, I think some people can kind of assume that either one, people are just overly sensitive, but I think until it impacts you, racial injustice when it comes to the justice system just seems like it's not really real. Yeah. I had a situation in my life about 15 years ago. I was actually wrongfully arrested in front of my son. Somebody had committed identity theft and had created this false bank account and wrote bad checks. And but that'll happen. Nobody can really control that. Yeah. Here's the part that was offensive as an African-American person, and the way it impacted me was going through the process and got arrested, got fingerprinted, which is just par for the course, got bonded out. Thank goodness that wasn't an issue. But the next day I found out the sheriff deputy that issued the warrant, and I went to see this deputy and sat down with her in Guilford County. And I first of all want to know why did you arrest me? I have a clean record. Couldn't someone have contacted me and asked me to come in? And she said, well, you look so much like the suspect. We just thought it was best to issue a warrant for your arrest. So I asked to see the video. The video was about a 500-pound African-American man with no hair in the top and just a little patch of hair on each side. And so I asked the deputy, I said, what comparison do you see there? And she said, well, you guys look similar to me. And I couldn't get that to jive. But I think one of the things that even disturbed me even worse was when I began trying to get that expunged from my record. Yes. That the lady, one of the first clerks that I came up to, she said, I can't find you in the system, as if there's an assumption that because I'm Black, I'm supposed to be in the system. That's the way I kind of took her approach towards me, as if she's shocked because she couldn't find any information.
Where's your criminal record? Where's your criminal record?
Exactly. You're supposed to have a criminal record. So things like that happen on a daily basis. And I don't think most people know how normal it is that when African-American people and brown people in general impact law enforcement, that for some, that there's almost a dismissive attitude, in my opinion, let me say in my opinion, to where, well, it's close enough. And whether it's factual or not, but those are some of the things that I think aren't real to other Americans and other North Carolinians, that there are racial disparities with the way African Americans and brown and Black people are treated versus our Caucasian and Asian brothers and sisters.
I'm sorry that happened to you. I mean, that's just very dehumanizing in a way that's with no cause. And I think that one thing that's happened because of this moment is there have been a lot of conversations where I think white people are hearing from Black friends and neighbors and colleagues stories like yours that don't always, I mean, there's not always really an easy opportunity to raise that kind of conversation in just the normal course of your daily life.
Right.
And so, for instance, my deputy chief of staff and legal counsel is a good buddy of mine, African-American guy, David Elliott. We actually grew up together in Chapel Hill. And he and I used to work together. I told you how I was in the Consumer Protection Division. He was a lawyer in the Consumer Protection Division. And he said one time he went to some county, I don't remember which county it was, to bring a case for the state. He was, a lawyer. And he walks in to the courtroom, and the assistant district attorney comes up to him with file and says, "What's your charge?" And he's wearing a suit and a tie and with a briefcase. Like, he's there like every other damn lawyer in the room.
Yeah.
But he's the one Black guy. And so he comes up presumed to be a criminal defendant. And we've got work to do.
Yeah.
I mean, we have work to do. But I pray that people, I think things are, I hope this is a moment where we can actually make a substantial step forward. Yeah. And you can kind of look through history at moments when we take leaps forward. And I just have a belief, and there's some of this being borne out by polling, that there's a change in the consciousness of white people that racism, whether it's explicit or implicit, whether it's just like people believe it and are prepared to say it, or people are unaware and they just live it, that it's real. And because there's a broader acknowledgement of that, I'm hoping that people are willing to bend over backwards to make changes to really address it.
Good. So here's a question I've got for you that I'm sure some of our people really want to know. Who polices those who police others? Not just, and I don't mean just, I'm not just inferring about police officers, but even there are occasions where attorneys are unethical, judges make decisions that aren't necessarily balanced or fair. Yes. Who polices the judicial system?
A great question, and there's not a clean answer that will probably be satisfactory. The way our system is designed, you've got district attorneys, and they're independently elected. They're constitutional officers. The state constitution creates the district attorney. So a lot of people think, oh, you're the attorney general, you're the top prosecutor, and there are all these other district attorneys. Surely you have some ability to sanction them if they do wrong. That is not the case. If they do something that's unethical, you can file a bar complaint against them like one can against any lawyer. Same thing with a judge. If a judge does something that's unethical, there's a Judicial Standards Commission that can oversee the judges. But if they're just doing things where they're exercising their discretion in a way that's not unethical, but you just think it's wrong, then the recourse ultimately is with the people in the form of elections, because we elect our district attorneys. Mm-hmm. We elect our judges. And that's sort of where it is. In terms of police officers, they are accountable to the chief, who's accountable to the mayor or city council, who are accountable to the people. Mm-hmm. And so if you have a police department that's out there mistreating their residents, then your recourse is through elected politics that way. There is something called the Training and Standards Commission for deputies and police officers, where if they are acting in a way, they can actually lose their certification to be officers. And so we can take some complaints and do some investigations that way. But it starts really through the law enforcement agency itself. They're all supposed to have sort of an internal affairs division which investigates the officers. But honestly, that's one of the issues that our task force is going to look into, is do we need to make changes in terms of enhancing the accountability of officers? It's one thing to set a standard that there should be no chokehold and a requirement that you intervene if you see another officer doing wrong. But what happens if the officer ignores those policies? What is the consequence of that? Mm-hmm. And so I assure you we will have recommendations on how to enhance accountability.
Okay. All right. I think that's certainly a consciousness that's been raised in this present climate, is that ultimately there is an accountability for everyone. And I know police officers have a difficult job. One of my good friends is a police officer, actually two. So I respect that job. That's a difficult job, but certainly I think we've had some injustices in the courtroom to where a judge that has similar cases rules so differently between an African American or brown or black skinned person versus sometimes that of a Caucasian case that's very similar. And I know we're all aware that we can kind of express our discontent with voting, but I wish that would be a consideration that even those who sit in that seat as judge, that they ultimately have some other means of accountability. Let's say, for example, they're 1 year into a 4-year term, and I know judges have assignments based upon what they do. But if they're 1 year into a 4-year term and they do something that's severely unjust, and you've got to wait another 3 years before you can do anything about it. So I would hope that might even be a consideration, at least for the group to have a discussion around.
Well, one thing we want to do is really improve the quality of the data so that if you have a situation where one judge is sentencing Black people who've committed the same crime as white people 25% more harshly than white people, we want that to be measurable and known, because then it becomes, whenever you have more transparency on things, and data is all about transparency, that creates cycles of accountability. Either the person, there could be a couple reasons. It could be that they don't even know that they're doing it, because like I said, there is bias that's implicit, meaning that the person's not even aware that they're doing it. So having that information can actually help them self-correct. Or if they are aware they're doing it and they just think racist thoughts, then the people will have a tool to identify how somebody's not performing appropriately. Whether there are other mechanisms for accountability, if people out there have ideas, we actually have a way to take everyone's input, and all they have to do is go to the website of my office, ncdoj.gov/TREC, TREC, which we shorthand for Task Force for Racial Equity in Criminal Justice, TREC. So ncdoj.gov/TREC, and people can fill out, there's a portal there where they can give comments and offer their ideas. So if people do have ideas on things we should be tackling, please let us know.
Okay. That leads me to this next question. I know the task force is also relying on participation from the community. They want to hear from the community. How would a person or an organization, how would they connect with this racial justice task force to share information, concerns, et cetera?
We had, as I mentioned, the public forum where any person could sign up a couple days ago. We're going to have one or two more of those in the coming weeks or months. And so going to that website I mentioned, and knowing that when that happens, people can have an opportunity to speak. We did this one during the day. We're going to try to do the next one in the evening, respecting the fact that some people work and couldn't get off. The other thing is this portal is open 24/7. So anytime anybody has any idea they want us to consider, just go to that website I gave earlier and give us your commentary, and it will be considered. It is not a black hole. It will be considered.
So kind of in that similar vein, just thinking about going forward with some other things that we're kind of seeing that are all attached. I think a lot of this conversation is interrelated. So we know the moratorium that was signed through an executive order that protected people, renters specifically, from being evicted. I'm sure the loophole has probably come to your attention to where some landlords have gotten so creative that they sell the house, to a family member. So it's not that I'm putting you out, but the house was sold, so you have to get out. Are you familiar with that loophole? And if so, is anything being done to stop that?
I have not heard of that one. The protections that have been in place for a number of months are starting to expire. things like protection against utilities being disconnected and against being evicted or foreclosed. Some of them are remain in effect. Some of them aren't. It's exceptionally complicated. So I'm actually glad you just asked this, because we have worked up a graphic that we're going to put out either today or tomorrow. We're going to do a couple graphics. We're doing one on utility services like power or water. We're going to do one on for rental, and we're going to do one on foreclosure. And I've got another page, if I can give you another website. It's ncdoj.gov, so the same basic website. And then it's dash COVID-19. And so we've got a whole page about all the work we're doing on COVID-19. And on that, there's a link to a page for people experiencing financial hardship. And so it could be up. I mean, I literally had a call at 4:30 on this topic. And so it could be on the website right now, or it may be tomorrow. But we're trying to give people helpful information for them to deal with what we know are crushing financial concerns.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. We know kind of another hot topic right now is the wearing of masks. I know we had a group of
I'm going to go plug my computer in because I'm worried. I don't want it to disconnect. I can hear you. You keep talking. I'll be right back.
Okay. All right. Excellent. But we did have a group of sheriffs across North Carolina who signed a joint letter that they would not enforce the wearing of masks for those who implemented those laws. And I just a question that I have, and some others may have this: how can law enforcement decide what laws they're going to enforce? And then conversely, if you choose what laws you're going to enforce, can I, as an individual, choose what laws I'm going to obey?
Very good question.
Okay.
The executive orders that the governor's issued come with a misdemeanor sanction. That is to be enforced by local law enforcement. So if you're in a town or a city, that's your police department. If you're in the county, it should be your sheriff. Mm-hmm. It is the law. The courts have upheld them as the law. And law enforcement should enforce the law as it's written. They should not substitute their judgment. You asked earlier, what accountability is there for law enforcement that doesn't do what it's supposed to do? The sheriffs, like the district attorneys, are independent constitutional officers. Mm-hmm. They don't report to the governor. They don't report to the Secretary of Public Safety. They don't report to me. They report to the voters. And so my answer is similar to what I gave earlier, which is if you feel like you have a sheriff that is not doing it the way that he or she should, that's the accountability.
Okay. All right. Well, Attorney General Stein, as we get ready to wrap up, I know one other thing that has happened in the midst of COVID-19 and being in quarantine is that we've seen a drastic increase in domestic violence cases.
Yes.
But since many of our courts weren't operating according to a normal calendar, I know that you and Chief Justice Cheryl Beasley worked on some structuring so that there would be a way or a means for those who have been impacted by domestic violence to still file charges and a case. So could you tell us a little bit about that, which you guys worked on jointly?
Sure. And the courts are now open, but for a couple months they weren't. Mm-hmm. And we wanted to be certain that people out there knew that even though the courts weren't open for normal business, that the doors of the courthouse always are open for people who fear for their safety at home. So if anybody out there is worried about domestic violence, that they can go get an order, a protective order, to make sure that a person who, an intimate partner cannot hurt you. And so what we did was communicated that, and we also urged every county that had the technological means, and unfortunately not every county has the same capacity, is to do these hearings remotely so that people didn't have to go into the courthouse, but could instead petition electronically so they wouldn't have to put their health at risk from transmission of COVID-19. I very much appreciated the Chief Justice on that. What you say is correct, is that in all of this sheltering in place, sort of the one crime we saw tick up was domestic violence, because people were stuck at home with each other under a great deal of stress. And those are the conditions in which you would see an increase in incidence of that crime. One thing I've been trying to do over the last year or two is work with local law enforcement agencies and service providers, the nonprofit groups that are out there helping women, children, but not exclusively. Some men are abused too, to protect those victims, to have them work in combination with law enforcement over something called the lethality assessment protocol, which is where local law enforcement has a series of questions when they come to a domestic dispute, where they pull the victim aside and ask her or him a series of questions. And depending on what the results are, if it's a certain score, then that person is at risk of violence and potentially homicide. Mm-hmm. And there are studies that have shown that where this protocol is in place, there's actually been a decline in murders, intimate partner murders. And so we've been trying to spread the gospel of this tool for law enforcement and social service agencies to deploy in combination and cooperation to try to save more lives.
Sure.
Half of all women who are murdered by their intimate partner.
Wow. Yeah, those statistics are pretty startling. But Attorney General Stein, I want to thank you for the time you've given us here with the General Baptist State Convention of North Carolina. I want to thank you for the collaborative work that the state is connecting with our convention to do. Thank you for all your efforts to protect us, to keep us safe from those who are less than scrupulous at all times.
Yes.
And to all of our guests and viewers, thank you for joining us for the Voice for Justice. We hope and pray that the time we spent together today has been informative as well as inspiring to let you know that our justice system does work for us. And just like us, all of us are ground under repair, and there's works that are being done to improve what's already there. Again, please keep connecting with us. We're going to keep providing you good information so you can know that you have a force that is on your side in your community. So until we meet again, we pray the Lord God bless you and keep you, and that he will make his face to shine upon you. Thank you all again for joining us, and we'll be back in touch and see you soon.
Thank you, Reverend.